Welcome everyone to the CSSE webinar, Best in Class Contractor Management. We're pleased to offer you an engaging webinar that will give you the tools to improve your contractor management strategies. My name is Erin Crisfield, CSSE's lifelong learning consultant, and I'm your host for today. Before we start, I'd like to give you a bit of a tour of the GoToWebinar doc on the right-hand side of your screen. You'll see three icons with drop-down arrows there. The first is your audio, which shows that you're muted for the webinar. And in a moment, I'll tell you how you can participate. The other area I'd like to draw to your attention is the handouts with the page icon. There you'll find the handout for this webinar, and you can download that now. The handout has key points and space to take notes, so it would be useful for you to have that open during the webinar. Now, if you can't see it or download it for some reason, possibly because of a firewall, we will send you the handout along with the recording tomorrow. And then finally, you'll see an area on your doc called Questions Chat with a hand icon. So if you have any questions during the webinar, please type them into that window. I'm going to monitor all of the questions related to the webinar content, and we'll have time for those at the end of the webinar. And I'd like to introduce you now to Rick Condon, CSSE's Digital Marketing and Communications Specialist, who's providing technical support for us today. Say hi to the folks, Rick.
Hi, everyone.
So Rick is going to watch the questions and chat area, and he'll deal with any troubleshooting questions that you type into that area. So let him know if you have any difficulties at all. So now, without further ado, I am going to introduce to you our presenter for today. Darren Haman is Senior Manager on ISN's HSE RABS team. He has 15 years of health and safety management experience in the United States and Canada. Darren has a BA in Sociology and a certificate in Health, Safety, and Environmental Processes, and he obtained his CRSP in 2007. So Darren, over to you.
Thanks, Erin. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining our session on best-in-class contractor management. For the next hour, we're going to discuss the importance of having a well-developed management system for your contractors. As you will see, there is a lot involved, and it is by no means an easy task. So looking at our agenda, we're going to start by talking about why we need an effective contractor management strategy. Then we're going to talk about the 10 strategic elements for best-in-class contractor management. So our company has come up with 10 recommendations that we feel are really important to having a well-developed contractor management strategy. And we're also going to talk about benchmarking and some case studies. So why do we need an effective contractor management strategy? Contractors play a strategic role. So there are many benefits to hiring contractors. Number one, they allow us to streamline our operations. So really it comes down to you do what you do best and you have contractors take care of the rest. Contractors enable us to manage risk. There is a higher likelihood of injuries when employees are asked to perform non-routine tasks. Hiring an experienced contractor that specializes in that type of work reduces that risk to your employees. Hiring contractors allows us to focus on our core competencies. So not only are your employees less safe when performing non-routine tasks, they're probably not very good at them either because it's not what they normally do. An experienced contractor is likely going to do higher quality work with less chance of problems, malfunctions, damage later on. Lastly, contractors allow us to optimize our cost structure. In most cases, it is cheaper to get a contractor to perform a job than it is to have a full-time employee complete it. So as you can see, there are many benefits of using contractors. However, there are a lot of challenges. And we're going to pause now for a discussion.
We've got a poll for you right now, so I'm going to put that up on your screen, folks. The question is, what industry best describes your employer or company? So you see a number of answers there. You can get your mice clicking on whichever one you want to choose for your answer. I'm seeing lots of responses coming in nice and quick today. 75% of you have already voted, so just give you a couple extra seconds there. Anyone else wants to get their vote in quickly? Oh, let's see if we can get 100%. We got 94. We're so close. All right, I'm going to close that out and share the results with you. So here they are. Looks like 47% are government public sector, 27% energy, 13% constructions, and 7 each for food, agriculture, and manufacturing. So government and public sector, Darren, is about half of the respondents today, and about a quarter of them are energy.
Interesting. Great. Well, it's nice we have a nice cross-section of people joining here today. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to hide that poll and we'll go back to Darren's presentation.
Sounds great. So bear with me here just one second. So my employer, we completed a survey of 161 decision makers across North America in late 2017, really asking them many different questions, but one of those is really about the types of contractors they hire in their company. So here are a few of our findings. Half of the companies surveyed said they outsource between 40 and 100% of work hours. Now, 100 may be on the extreme end, but even if your company only outsources 20% of the work, that is still a significant percentage of your operations. Furthermore, 42% of the organizations surveyed plan to increase contractor use in the coming years. So breaking it down by industry, here's what the key decision makers told us. The oil and gas industry, they use a lot of contractors, and what we found is in 14% of the companies surveyed, more than 80% of the work is completed by contractors. So if you do work in the oil and gas industry, this is obviously really important to them because contractors are just such a high percentage of the work. In manufacturing, a much higher percentage of the work is completed internally, but 9% of companies told us contractors complete at least 40% of the work. And in the utilities and power generation industry, they also hire a lot of contractors. 56% of respondents claim contractors complete at least 40% of the work. So I realize that's just a small chunk of all the industries that are even represented on this call here today, but those are just a few of the main ones and some of the responses that we saw.
Yeah, so folks, you'll see that was connected to the poll that we did earlier. So the discussion question that Darren wanted to also include early in the presentation here is, I'm going to read that to you in just a second. So I'm just going to let you know that you can send your responses to any discussion questions in the chat area, or you can put in questions you have for Darren there as well, and we'll track those. So the question for you to respond to now is, what do you think is the greatest challenge with managing contractors? So you can type your responses in there and I'll read those out. What do you think is the greatest challenge with managing contractors? I'm going to wait for some responses to come in that chat area. It's a good time to let him know what the challenges are for you, because then he can kind of incorporate that into his presentation as well. Competency of contractors, that's from Sahar.
Great.
And Tanya says injury reporting and managing risk. And Joel says following our internal processes. So a range of things people are coming up with here. Terrence says ensuring that contractors are qualified and competent. So go back to competency again being a significant issue.
Excellent.
Yeah, so there's a nice selection of things there just to give us an idea going in. And Rhonda's added overall implementation of a contractor management system and ensuring compliance with limited impact.
Perfect.
Great, thanks everybody.
Right, well, great.
Thanks everyone.
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you everyone for your responses. So yeah, some of the responses that you all just gave are common with the types of challenges that we see in here. So we've outlined a few of them. So lack of a cost-effective process or a lack of a standard cost-effective process. So really that kind of comes down to do all of your locations have the same rules? So if you're right across Canada, right across North America, even just right across Ontario, if you have multiple sites, is everybody following that same standard cost-effective process? Depending on how many contractors your company uses, you may require a full-time employee to take care of all the contractor management responsibilities. In most cases, we won't have a full-time employee to take care of contractor management, so it'll most likely be you managing your contractors in addition to everything else you do. So maybe you're a health and safety professional, health and safety coordinator. That's really what you're supposed to be doing, but the contractor management is something that's tacked onto your role. So you got to find time to be able to do that in addition to everything else. Really, one of the challenges, so if you're a health and safety coordinator at a site, is are you qualified to actually look at some of the documentation and really approve some of the things that your contractors might be sending you? So for example, if part of your pre-qualification is getting them to send you their insurance, are you qualified to know whether that insurance certificate that they submitted actually meets your requirements or actually does minimize risk to your company? I can tell you from experience myself, I used to do contractor management at a smaller company, and I'd get things like that, and I would look for some of the basics on an insurance document, but I didn't really know what I was seeing, if it was right or wrong. Ineffective communication tools. If we maintain the contractor list, how do the people hiring contractors know if they're approved or not? What if their insurance just expired? I'm sorry, I think I said that wrong, so let me say that one more time. If you maintain the contractor list, how do the people hiring the contractors at your organization know if they're approved or not? So it's probably not safety who's actually the ones that are hiring the contractors to do the work. It could be somebody in operations or engineering or construction. So are you able to communicate those requirements, making sure that that pre-qualification and everything is met, and those people know what they need to do? Insufficient reporting, data analysis, and benchmarking. Is your contractor management system in line with industry? And how would you know that? Are you able to benchmark against other companies, talk to other safety professionals really to know what their contractor management program is like? System integration can be costly and cumbersome. So does your contractor pre-qualification and maintenance system need to talk to your payment system? Building a system like this is not easy, and by no means is it cheap. All right, so let's get into the good stuff. So let's talk about the 10 strategic elements for best-in-class contractor management. So this is the 10 all laid out on one slide. I'm going to go through these one by one on the coming slides, so I'm not going to spend too much time on the list. If you are writing this down, you'll have plenty of time as we go through to keep track of these top 10. So number one is to establish a clear communication strategy. So we'll talk about the requirements. So it's really starting on the left-hand side. So what are your company's requirements? What do contractors need to know if they're going to perform work at your company? So you may start with your site or company goals. So if you have goals for 0 injuries or that everybody needs to participate in safety meetings, those kinds of things, you need to communicate that to the contractors so they can be a part of that and know what they're needing to do. You likely have some site or company general safety rules, policies, and procedures. So, if you have a policy that safety glasses need to be worn everywhere on site, you got to make sure that the contractors are going to know that. The contractor pre-qualification requirements, so we're going to get into some detail on that in the next slide, but the contractors need to know, is there documentation that they need to provide you, and what documentation is that? And then ongoing maintenance requirements. So again, I talked about insurance earlier. If you get an insurance certificate from a contractor, that doesn't last forever. Typically, those will expire after a year. So you need to make sure that on an ongoing basis that the contractors know that they need to submit that insurance or that workers' comp, whatever that might be, to stay current with your requirements. So then we move on to the methodology in the middle. So how are you going to communicate that to the contractor? So a lot of companies would have a contractor handbook or a little orientation guide that they would give to a contractor, maybe review with them when they arrive at site. That's a great way to communicate all those goals and policies and procedures and all that information on the left-hand side. Maybe through just mail, right? Maybe you mail the information out. Maybe you email. A little more 21st century to do that, or even to take that a step further and look at electronic platforms. So maybe things like a Facebook page or something like that. Social media is a way that you could communicate with your contractors. On the far right, engagement. So how are you going to engage with those contractors? So it's one thing to send them documentation in an email or the requirements in an email, but are they going to have a chance to really discuss that with you, to really make sure that you know that they know what those requirements are? So that might be coming down to having a one-on-one meeting with contractors. Maybe it's having a workshop or a town hall. So, maybe you have, every few months, every 6 months, whatever that might be, a meeting with all your contractors, bring them all together, and you can share all of the information and have discussions at that time. So we talked all about communicating with the contractors, but you don't want to forget about internal communication. So we can dream up all these great programs in the safety world, but we also need to make sure that we're communicating that to everybody else in our organization. So again, talking about those hiring managers, the people who are actually hiring the contractors, do they know what the requirements are, and are they going to support that? Because if a contractor gets something, they don't like it, they don't understand it, the first call they're going to make is to that contact that they have at your company. So you want to make sure that that contact is able to articulate the program and explain everything that needs to be done. Okay, so we talked on the last page about pre-qualification. So what are some of the standard pre-qualification documents or records that you would ask a contractor to provide? So looking at that on the left-hand side, so you may have a pre-qualification questionnaire. So maybe this is just basic information about the company, so who the owner is, what the contact numbers are, all that kind of thing, address, any of that kind of information. But then it might get into some more important information as well, like maybe that's where you collect their incident statistics. So have you had any injuries in the last few years? List them all out. What was the severity? That kind of thing. That's kind of information that could be captured in a pre-qualification questionnaire. Insurance certificates, you want to make sure that they have insurance that will meet your company's requirements, again, just to minimize the risk against your company. Workers' compensation clearance, so making sure that they're covered by workers' comp, so if one of their workers gets injured when they're on your site, your company is not on the hook for paying any workers' comp premiums if that company has somehow come into default with workers' comp. You might also collect workers' compensation rates or the premium rate statements. Now, this looks a little different in every province. Every workers' comp agency or board kind of has their own way of doing this, but the contractor should be able to supply you with a premium rate statement. And really what that shows is how that company compares to other companies who perform that type of work. So workers' comp kind of groups everybody in similar industries. If you see that that company is getting a discount on their workers' comp premiums versus the industry average, then that tells you that they've got a pretty good injury history, and then that may be somebody that you want to use. Certificate of recognition, again, kind of different across the country as to kind of how it works, what industries are involved, that kind of thing. But if you have a certificate of recognition or core in your province, that could be something that you'll want to collect. Health and safety manual. Now you can collect the health and safety manual and read it to cover and make sure that every safety policy meets the regulations in your province. You're probably not going to have time to do that. So even short of actually reviewing the manual, maybe it's just collecting the table of contents. Maybe it's just asking them, hey, I know you're going to be doing elevated work at our company. Do you have a fall protection program? So it's one thing to collect all that information, but then on the right-hand side, you might want to look at having some kind of a scorecard. So maybe all those things on the left are all worth the same to you. Maybe they're not. Maybe what you want to do is kind of have a bit of a system where, let's say everything comes to a total of 100 score, and then each piece of that is worth a different piece of that 100. You add it all up, and then maybe you spit out like a grading system. So if they have an 80 to 100 score, they get an A. If they have less than 50, they get an F, whatever that might be. So just looking at an example here, so what we've done is really on this one, the safety programs are what is actually the biggest chunk of the grade for this particular scorecard. So it's actually 50% of the grade you would have to have your safety programs in, and it kind of works its way down from there. You may see those ones where they say 0 out of 0. You might look at that as something what we would call a showstopper. So you don't get credit for having a valid certificate of insurance or valid workers' compensation. You just would be disqualified if you don't have it. So you really would go from having an acceptable score to having an F grade if you don't have those two documents in place, because those are just really a cost of doing business that everybody needs to have. Element number two is your program needs to be designed to measure performance. So you can look at both lagging indicators as well as leading indicators. You know, all the talk in the safety world right now is about leading indicators, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But I think we all understand that lagging indicators are still predominant. It's still something that a lot of companies look at. It's still really a good way for you to be able to measure your company's performance against others because everybody collects this information. So some examples of that would be collecting the contractor's incident rate. So have they had any recordable injuries? You'd want to know that. Workers' comp rates, which I talked about before, maybe any records of collisions, property damage, environmental spills, any kind of fines or prosecutions. Depending on what province you work in, you can do searches for companies to actually see whether or not they have had any fines for any health and safety or environmental infractions. Leading indicators, so some examples of things that you could measure on your contractors. So workplace inspections, so maybe you have a requirement where the contractor needs to do an inspection. If it's a long project and they're there for a couple of months, maybe every day they need to do a worksite inspection. You collect those, that could be one measure that you use to grade that contractor's performance. You might look at near miss and hazard reporting. So are they reporting near misses just like your employees would? An observation program, so similar to like a behavior-based program where employees are commenting on other employees' work performance. Does the contractor have that, and did they actually do those observations with each other? Risk assessments, so making sure that an FLHA or whatever that may be in your company is done on a daily basis or before each job is performed. You might also look at employee perception surveys, so maybe you do those in your company for your employees. Doesn't hurt to get your contractors to do it as well. Okay, so you want to incorporate a risk ranking process. That's number 3. So contractors come in various sizes, capabilities, and risk profiles. You want to classify risk according to preset criteria. Maybe you develop a risk matrix. We've got an example on the right-hand side here. If you were to Google risk matrix, thing like that, you're going to come up with a lot of different examples. So by no means do you need to use this. Maybe the one you're already using is already working. But in this example, what we've done here is we've really broken it down by what type of work a contractor performs and then where at your site they're performing that work. So if you look at the rows at the bottom, these are all the different sections of maybe of your site where the contractors could be working. And then on the vertical column is just all the different functions. So again, every contractor is going to be different, but in this case, these are just maybe some different work types of things that that company would do. Wherever you see that green, or I actually think that's more blue than green, that would mean that the contractor would not fall into the contractor management system. So if you look at the left corner, left bottom corner, so somebody who works in, they're working off-site and they're maybe just doing office cleaning, maybe that's something where they wouldn't need to be in your program. Everything on the orange are contractors who would need to go through all the pre-qualification and maintenance requirements for your company.
And we've got a poll here for you, right?
Yes.
Yes, so we're going to take a look, get your input into this. How does your company decide which contractors need to be qualified? We've got 3 options for you to choose your best answer from there, so you can get your answers in. They're starting to come in here. How does your company decide which contractors need to be qualified? About a third of the folks voting, up to 50%, so that's great. Answers are coming in fast and furious.
Great, thanks for your participation, everyone.
Yeah, a couple more seconds here. And I'm going to close that and share the results with you. So 56% say all contractors must be qualified. 25, we don't qualify contractors at this time, and 19% only medium or high risk must be qualified. So over half of people are qualifying everyone.
Okay, that's great. And hey, you got to do what works for you. So if really everything at your company where a contractor would perform work would be kind of what you'd consider medium risk at worst, by all means have everybody participate. I think you can kind of walk a fine line of really what your definition of a contractor is. So In some cases, you might have delivery personnel, maybe going a little further than a courier, but maybe somebody like if you have drinking water that's brought into your office, you'll have the water person that'll come in, they'll go past reception, they'll put the water jug down. Do you consider them a contractor because they're actually coming into your office? Maybe they just stop and they just deliver it at the front desk. In that case, maybe they're not part of it. So those are the kinds of things to think about. You will have contractors that may come into your site that maybe aren't real medium or high risk. How are you going to handle those?
Great. So I'm going to close that poll and you're back on your screen, Darren.
Great. And number 4 is to follow a 4-step due diligence process. So you may think of this as 3 steps, 3 or 4 work. Really, when we kind of go down this funnel, we'll start at the top with contractors reporting their information. So we've gone through a whole bunch of it already, but they're going to give you those insurance certificates or the table of contents from your safety manual, whatever that might be. You probably want to do more than just collect that from them. You actually probably want to have some kind of a review and verification of that information. So again, with insurance, does it meet the requirements? They could be sending you any kind of document. What if it expired 3 years ago? That's not really going to do much good. So somebody's got to look at that information and really make sure that it meets all of the requirements. And then steps 3 and 4, you could combine these or you can maybe keep them separate like they are here on the funnel, but you want to also do some assessment of the implementation of their safety program. So maybe you would ask them for some documentation. So show me some training records that shows that your employees have been trained. Maybe specifically the individual or individuals that come onto my site, I want to see their training records to show that they've been properly trained. You might do an office visit, do an interview with a couple of employees even to get a little bit better perception of the implementation of their programs. And then those on-site inspections. So when they're at your site, do you or a safety coordinator or somebody at your company go around and do a work-in-progress audit of the contractors to make sure that they're following all of the rules? Strategic element number 5 is to maintain a qualified contractor list. So we've probably all been in this situation. Quick, we need them now. What are we going to do? So just think about right now, wherever you are that's sitting, if you're sitting in your company's office, what would happen if a water pipe burst? Do you have a contractor who is qualified, that's already met your requirements, who you could call on an emergency basis, get them to be able to come in and do that work where, again, there's not exposing your company to any risk because all the pre-qualification has been met? If you don't have that, that's something that you might want to look at doing. So maybe try to create a contractor list. So think about, and of course, we're not going to be able to think about every possible bad thing that could ever happen at your location, but think about maybe some of the more common ones. What are some of the things that could happen? Do we have a contractor that we could call who'd be qualified to do that? If not, maybe look at trying to pre-qualify those. So maybe that plumber, maybe you might need a plumber once a year. It's not a lot of work, but you talk to that plumber and say, hey, you go through our pre-qualification. We'll make sure that if and when we need that type of work done in the future, you'll be the one that we call. And the contractors, yeah, some of them probably aren't going to want to be bothered, but most of them are actually going to embrace that kind of thing. They want you as a customer. They'll be willing to go through that process. Maintaining a qualified contractor list helps to enhance your procurement integrity as well. So contractors do talk to each other depending on kind of where you are. Certainly if you're in a small town, that happens. They go to a coffee shop, they're talking about the work that they're doing at a certain location, and they'll hear it. If one contractor says, oh yeah, they let me work for them, I don't have to do any of this stuff. My wife is friends with the manager of the place, whatever that might be. That kind of thing can certainly have an impact on the integrity of your procurement system. So as much as possible, if you can have everyone on a level playing field and make sure that everybody needs to meet the same requirements, that really helps a lot. And as I said, it builds stronger and lasting partnerships with contractors so they know, hey, we'll go through this process. I know that we'll be the one that you'll call if you ever need us. Next, To establish consequences. So we can talk this up and ask all the contractors to do all these things. Some of them are probably not going to do what you ask them to do. So you're going to have to kind of think about how you're going to deal with those situations. So what you'll typically see is if you have no contractor pre-qualification process in place today and you try to implement that as new, it usually will break down into thirds. So you'll have 1/3 of your contractors that'll say, hey, yeah, no problem. You guys are a great customer of mine. I've got nothing to hide. I'll go through all the process. They jump in, they get it done, no problem. The second third may have some questions. Maybe that's when they're going to call that contact at your site where you've already trained them and make sure that that contact knows what they need to say and do. They'll talk it through. They might complain a little bit, but hey, again, your business is important, so they'll come on board. Then you'll have that last third. Now, these may be the ones who have worked for your company for 20 years. They've never had to do any of this stuff. Why do I have to do it now? Maybe they're no-choice contractors, or what I would call a no-choice, meaning that they're the only game in town. They're the only people that do this type of work. They don't want to qualify, there's not really any other option for you. So you want to make sure that you have a plan for those no-choice contractors. How would you deal with those? So really that happens in every organization. There's going to be those one-off situations. Maybe it is just a matter of whenever they're on your site, you have somebody that has to monitor them constantly just to make sure that they're following all the procedures and staying safe. One way to make your pre-qualification work well is to include this in any master service agreements or contracts. So if you have an existing contract where the company, it does make it a little bit harder to implement something like this. But if you're starting from scratch and you want to just launch this program, you're hiring a new contractor, actually put that in the service agreement so they know that they need to meet those requirements in order to work for your company. Doing this eliminates time and effort required to manage challenging performers. Sorry, something's blocking my screen here. Okay. And it provides a base of fewer, safer, better contractors. So maybe you have a situation, I'll just use a welder as an example. So you have a welder that you've been using for a couple of years. You ask them to go through all their pre-qualification. They tell you to go jump in a lake. Well, maybe there's other welders in your area that you could call and get them qualified. Maybe you've got 5 welders that you actually have qualified in your company, but maybe there's only really 2 of them that you use on an ongoing basis. So maybe that's a case where you can actually filter that down and just maintain a contractor list that has just the group of contractors that really are the safest and best.
We've got another poll for you here. So what does your company do with contractors who can't or won't pre-qualify? So Darren touched on this a little bit, and now we'd like to hear from you. What does your company do with contractors who can't or won't pre-qualify? Let's get your responses to that poll. Got 4 options there for you. Oh, I got about half of folks who voted already. A couple more seconds here. We'll see how you're doing. So I'm going to close that now, last chance, and here we go. So what this looks like, Darren, is there's 47% allow them to work with senior management approval, 40% do not allow them to work or find someone else, 13% allow them to work for a supervisor, and no one chose allow them to perform work without restrictions. So almost half allow them to work with senior management approval, and a total of 87% for the last 2 choices there, with approval or don't allow them at all.
Fantastic. So, all right, well, I threw the allow them to perform work without restrictions to trick everybody. Nobody fell for it, so that's good to see. Yeah, that would be the one that I would really have the most concerns about, is you just really let them do it without, any kind of supervision or anything. I think all the other options are feasible. You got to do what kind of works within your company.
All right, so your slides are back.
Okay, number 7, what are you going to do with subcontractors? So you may have a large construction project where you have hired a general contractor, they've gone through all the pre-qualification, you think you're all good to go, and one day you go out to your job site and you see vehicles with logos on them that you don't recognize. And you go to the contractor manager and like, hey, what's going on? Why are these who are these people? Well, yeah, I hired these subcontractors. So you need to know or have a program in place where you can communicate to the general contractor in that case that, hey, you also have to deal with your subs. So you can't just bring anybody onto my site without them going through some kind of a process. So there's really two ways of kind of dealing with subcontractors just to make sure that they meet all of their requirements. Number one is to ensure that they are qualified or monitored to meet the same standards as the general. So everybody, every contractor that steps foot on your site, they all need to meet your qualification requirements. You let the general know that. You bring an electrician on, they need to be pre-qualified by our company. The other way to do that is to actually put that ownership in the hands of the general contractor. And you say, okay, Mr. or Mrs. General Contractor, you need to have a program in place to pre-qualify any subs that you bring on site. You can outline what the requirements are, but you need to make sure that every one of those meet your minimum requirements before you can use them. Number 8 is to follow standardized and transparent guidelines. So this, on the left-hand side, Kinder Morgan is an oil and gas pipeline company. You can see that's kind of a map of where all their pipelines go. Really, it's certainly all over the United States, up into Canada. We're still waiting on some of that to actually happen, but you can see where they've got operations everywhere. So how did they make sure that if they got a site down in Florida and then another site in Arizona or wherever that might be, are they communicating with each other? Are they all following the same standard process, or is everybody doing their own thing? So consistency and transparency is a common challenge. So this kind of thing happens where everybody kind of does their own thing. As much as possible, try to have one standard process that you can get everybody on board and everyone doing the same thing. Number 9 is to integrate your contractor management system with internal business processes. So contractor management is an integral part of the complete business process. The goal is to drive end-to-end risk management. So some examples of ways that you can do this and really make kind of contractor management a part of your overall business or your overall system is to tie purchase orders directly to whether or not somebody is qualified. So we've heard of some companies where their payment system will actually not generate a payment unless that contractor has met all the qualification requirements. If your company has something like that and you can kind of throw that little veil thread at the contractor like, hey, you don't do this, we can't even pay you, that does tend to help to get things done. Another way to do that is to have, if you have controlled access at your site, to have some kind of a badge program where contractors would actually have to meet all the requirements. Everything is tied into a badge that's scanned when they arrive at your site. If they meet the requirements, they get a green light, they can go and do their work. If they don't, they have to meet whatever those missing requirements are before they would be allowed on site. So Apache is an offshore oil and gas company. This particular situation, they're working in the Gulf of Mexico down in the United States. Obviously, as you see that kind of platform out in the middle of the ocean, that's controlled access. The only way really to get to that is either by boat or by helicopter. So in that kind of situation, if you have something like that where you can control the access, they can have it where you can't even get on that helicopter on the shore until you've scanned and you've met all of those requirements. Element number 10, last but not least, take safety culture to the next level. So it's a hard enough job to look after health and safety for your own employees. It makes it even more risky or more of a health and safety concern when you've got contractors on site, potentially multiple contractors. Everybody's kind of doing their own thing. Best-in-class organizations identify the safety attitude of their sites and modify as needed. So maybe it's not just for your employees. Maybe you try to bring your contractors into the safety culture that you have in your organization. What we see best-in-class organizations do is they see contractors as partners to promote ownership and safety. They include contractor safety metrics and company-wide goals. So if you're looking at your injury statistics in your company, do you include contractors in that? They're at your site. What they're doing is impacting the safety of your employees. So maybe that is something that you want to do. Actually have the have contractors report their hours and any kind of injuries that they have. Conduct regular meetings with contractors to build site engagement and reinforce culture. One idea, which I touched on earlier, is if you do perception surveys of your employees to kind of gauge their buy-in on the safety program, maybe you could do that with contractors as well. Do a survey of them. Hey, what did you think about working for our company? Did you feel safe when you were working here? Did you observe anything that made you uncomfortable? Get that feedback from them in that way.
We've got a discussion question for you here. We'd really like to get your input into this, and you can type your responses into the chat area. So the question is, what is one thing you would change about your company's contractor management program? So thinking about the 10 steps and elements that Darren has presented here today, what's one thing you would change about your company's contractor management program? So I'm going to watch for responses to come in the chat and read those out so everybody can hear from the folks who are responding. Let's give you a little bit of time for typing. So the question again is, what is one thing you would change about your company's contractor management program? Folks probably weren't ready for the typing task. Gotta get your fingers warmed up again. Okay, so Josh says more ownership on the project manager's side and less on the safety managers.
Good one.
Yeah. Jason says more accountability for subcontractors who bring on subcontractors. And Don says being more inclusive of contractors, include them more in safety meetings. Joel has added, Joel's added contractors and internal staff would follow all aspects of the program all the time. So that consistency. And Lawrence says contractor performance measurement, and Sahar also says measure performance.
Wonderful. All right. Well, I hope with going through those 10 elements that you picked up some good tips that you can use. All those things are certainly good things that you would want to work on if you're not already doing those. I realize that we're getting a little short on time, so I'm going to go a little bit quicker here through the remaining slides. I want to leave a little bit of time for some additional questions at the end. What I wanted to share with you is just some data that our company has collected. Again, really it's kind of back to that survey of decision makers that we took back at the end of 2017. We are going to be presenting at the Professional Development Conference in Winnipeg in September, which kind of is the evolution of this best-in-class presentation. So this kind of gives some of the basics of contractor management. The presentation that we're doing in Winnipeg is going to be the next step. So let's get into a little bit more detail. Let's talk about what others in the industry are doing and share some of that information. So if you're going to Winnipeg, I would love to see you in that session, and I'll give you a little bit more details about that here in a few minutes. So just looking at the companies that we surveyed, so if you look on the left-hand side, these are all the industries that were represented. So really nice cross-section of industries that participated in this survey. On the right-hand side is who are those individuals at the company who were responding. So what we did find was about 80% of the respondents were, or I'm sorry, 65% of the respondents were either at the director or vice president level. So these are high-level individuals in large corporations that are really throughout North America. So few data points I'm going to share. So one of our findings was, so what is the size of, or how many contractors does your company hire? So if we look at the left-hand side, so 41% of the organizations that we surveyed indicated that they hire fewer than 250 contractors. And then on the far right, 23% hire over 1,000. So having a good contractor management program really is important no matter how many contractors you hire. It really just depends. It's going to, obviously, the number of resources or amount of resources you're going to put into it. That's what's going to vary. If you only hire 5 contractors, it's not going to be as big of a job as a company that actually looks after 1,000. Okay, and process ownership. So we, often get asked, well, who should own the contractor management program? So should it be health and safety? Should it be the operations or engineering or maintenance department? Should it be supply chain, or procurement individuals? So you might be looking at those bubbles and think, wow, Darren is really bad at math because those do not add up to 100%. Well, the reason for that is because the respondents were given the option to give multiple answers. So in most of the situations that we found, contractor management really was a dual role between health and safety and the supply chain or procurement individuals. So that's why you see that. But regardless, if it was going to only be one, health and safety tends to be the group that is more predominant. We talked about this earlier. We had a discussion and asked you all kind of what are some of the challenges that you face. So we kind of beat this one to death, but just showing you a little bit of what the survey respondents said. So definitely the shortage of skilled and competent workforce is the top challenge. Some of the other ones there, so shortage of qualified contractor companies. So again, maybe if you're in a smaller town, there may only be one game in town when it comes to hiring a contractor. So you don't have a lot of choice. And it kind of works its way down from there. And again, we're going to be sharing a lot more of this information at the Professional Development Conference in Winnipeg. So I would invite you to attend. My colleague Richard Sorrenzio will also be presenting with me, and that will be happening on the Monday afternoon. So hope to see you there. Want to just take 1 minute real quick just to talk a little bit about my company. I promise it won't be long, but the employer that I work for is called ISN. We have a software program called IS World, a website where we help companies to manage their contractors. So if you're sitting through this and you're thinking, oh my goodness, this is a lot of work, how are we ever going to find the resources to do all of that pre-qualification and management? That's something that our company does. So we've been in industry for about 15 years. We have 600 hiring clients. So these are the big companies from around the world that hire the contractors. And then there are about 70,000 contractors in our system. The clients, the people hiring the contractors pay a subscription fee, and it's kind of an all-you-can-eat buffet. They would be able to really partake in everything that we have to offer. Contractors also pay a subscription fee based on the size of their company. If you are interested in this, we have on our website best-in-class contractor management technical white paper. So everything that I just covered in this presentation, all those 10 strategic elements, those are all covered in much more detail in our technical white paper. I'll leave that website address up there just for a few seconds. If you want to write that down, if you're interested in doing that, just provide your contact information and we can send you one of these especially if it's something where you want to be able to share that with certain individuals in your organization, might be helpful to get your hands on that. And I'm also going to provide my contact information. So if you have any questions for me, any kind of follow-up that you want to do, I am happy to give you a call, to answer any questions by email, anything like that. So please feel free to write down my information.
Great, thank you, Darren. So we're at the point now, folks, when we have time to do some Q&A. If you have questions for Darren, please do enter those into the chat area where you put your responses to the questions we asked you earlier. While you're thinking about that, I'm going to give you one more poll. So this is going to be one last poll for you. Which of the following best describes your company's use of contractors? So you can actually choose more than one of these if you wish. So just do that poll quickly and type in any questions you have for Darren for the Q&A into the chat window. I'd like to see how your company currently uses contractors. And again, you can do more than one answer if more than one applies to you. A couple more seconds to vote there. I'm going to share those responses. All right, so it looks like 40% say they use more than 100 contractors in a typical year. and 20% say less than 100. 27 say that contractors perform most of the work on their site, and only 13 say that they use contractors rarely.
That's great. Looks like once again we have a nice cross section of a number of different types here. So that's great. Thank you.
Yeah. So definitely some time for Q&A, folks. We've got a few more minutes here. So one question for Darren. Given all these 10 elements, what's the one best thing we can do to improve contractor management? So if we want to take a quick win to our management team, something they can do to make a substantial difference, what's the one best thing we can do?
Well, I think, you know, depending on who you're talking about, but if you're talking about if you're talking to senior management in the organization, I think there's a couple of things really that tend to be important to those individuals. So what is it going to cost me, and what is the risk to our company? So I think getting your hands on that technical white paper, or maybe you've done a great job taking all your notes. I know you're going to have the handout as well that you have available, and kind of sharing some of that information about, hey, just what is the risk to our company? What are some of the things that we're not doing that we need to be doing? And even from a cost perspective, you know, I don't like to talk too much about liability, but, you know, just think about situations. So what if you had a contractor and they drove a forklift through the wall at your site, and, you know, all of a sudden now all your operations are shut down, nothing can happen. You find out that that contractor doesn't have valid insurance. So now not only have you lost production, but you're also on the hook to pay for all of that damage to your site. So really, again, kind of focusing on the risk as well as the cost is kind of what I would go to.
Great, thanks, Darren. We've got a question from Sarah. She asks, how do you get internal managers on board to understand the importance of contractor management?
What I just said, I guess. So you might have typed that while I was talking, but I think really when you're talking to senior managers, again, really just to try to focus on the risks, give some examples of, you know, maybe things that we're not doing, and what if this worst case scenario happened. You know, what are some of the repercussions to our company if we don't have this in place? You know, way back when Bill C-45 that came in place in Canada, which is now you know, in the criminal code, it does, you know, organizations are liable for all of the work that is done at your sites, whether it is employees or if visitors or contractors or anybody is there. Your company could actually be held criminally liable for not making a safe environment for your people. So, you know, again, you know your culture better than me if that's the kind of thing you want to go to, but short of that, at least you can still bring up some examples of the kind of risk that would be involved in not having a good contractor management program in place.
And Darren, earlier in the presentation, you talked about ways to give information to your contractors about the company. So you talked about having a manual or meeting with them, sending them something by mail or email, and you mentioned electronic platform. And when you talked about that, you talked kind of about social media, but I'm wondering, with the electronic platform, are any companies creating videos or short courses or anything for their contractors on their company safety procedures and things they need to know in contracting for that company?
Yeah, that actually, I think you might have just come up with a new addition to our slide. I think that actually is something we should put on there. It is quite common to have an orientation video of some kind. Now, you can wait until the contractors arrive at site where you have a video that they would sit and watch for 20 minutes. It would go through all those procedures. But there's ways where you can do it, you know, in 2019 where you could actually send them that and they could actually do it remotely on a website or wherever that might be. So then when they arrive at your site, they kind of know everything that they need to know and they can just get in and do the work.
Great.
So that's a great addition.
Great, thank you. Any last questions, folks? Your last chance to ask Darren some questions directly. All right, well, I'm not seeing any, so we will wrap up then. Thank you. Oh, wait a second. We do have one more from Sarah here. How do you keep your professional integrity if a contractor has been awarded a project and you're required to qualify a contractor after the award, and there are no options not to have the contractor perform the work? That's a very good question, Sarah.
Well, that is a really tough one. So as much as you can going forward from today on, to try to have that pre-qualification in place before they actually are hired. It's really what you want to do. Now, if you're stuck in those positions, which we have all been in those positions in the past, really just to maybe start with just seeing if you can have a meeting with the contractor, maybe get your operations or the contacts that would be working with them involved, and kind of try to go through and go through some of those risks, not only to your company, but maybe risks to the contractor as well, in not having these procedures and processes in place. Try to reason that way. If you kind of still can't get to where you want to get to, it may be a situation where you need to have somebody kind of monitoring them and really kind of working with them the whole time, just to make sure that they're not breaking any of your major safety rules.
Great, thank
I feel
you.
for you, Sarah. That's a tough position to be in. I've been in that myself, and there's only so much you can do.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Darren, for answering those questions on the fly, and thank you for your presentation and sharing your expertise with us today. Thanks to everybody for attending. This is our last webinar before the summer break, and we do have some more coming up in the fall. You'll see those on the screen for you right now, that we have 3 lined up, and the dates of those and registration will be announced and open soon, so keep an eye on our website for that. You're going to receive a survey from us when you log out of GoToWebinar. A survey will pop up on your screen, and we do invite you to fill that out. It's really useful for us to get your feedback so we can continue to grow this new education program for CSSC members. So thank you again for attending, everybody, and have a very safe day.
Thanks, everyone.